Hello, brothers and sisters. This is Blake with Defending Zion. I've got another presentation here. This one's going to be on the Book of Mormon, and I'm entitling it The Most Correct Book on Earth. That was something that Joseph Smith claimed about the Book of Mormon, and I have found that there is things in the Book of Mormon that will prove this, certain consistencies in the way that the Book of Mormon was translated, in the way the Book of Mormon was compiled, that show that it was translated in the way it was, and that it is compiled from ancient records from the Americas. So to understand this first, we've got to understand kind of how the plates were compiled, or how the Nephites wrote them. So we start out with Lehi at the beginning of the Book of Mormon. He creates a record of his own life, prophecies, and dreams. And then, after a while, Nephi, his son, receives this record. And then he includes an account of his own history of his people during his time. Yeah, this, as Nephi describes it, is also a history of the reign of the kings and the wars and contentions of the Nephites. And it's also what's later commonly referred to as the large plates of Nephi. Now, during Nephi's life, he's also given a commandment to create a separate record that deals with his own ministry and teachings. And this becomes known as the small plates of Nephi. So we've got two sets of records here. Now, just before Nephi dies, he passes these large plates to who all term King Nephi the First. We don't know if that's what his actual title was, but after Nephi died, the people wanted a king, and so they named this leader after Nephi. And then Nephi passes the small plates, which he has been compiling and writing upon spiritual things, to his brother Jacob. Now, between this time and King Benjamin, we don't really know, I guess, where exactly these two separate plates went. We assume that the large plates continued with those kings and those rulers, and that the small plates continued through the lineage. So some of the small plates would have gone from Jacob to Enos to Jerem, so on and so forth. Well, a few hundred years later, we find out that King Benjamin, he gets both sets of records back. So he has both the large plates and the small plates. And then hundreds and hundreds of years later, we learn from Mormon that he himself has obtained both of these plates as well. So, over quite a long period of time, both these large plates and small plates are written upon by different people until they eventually get to the prophet Mormon. So what does Mormon do with the records? Well, first of all, he abridges the large plates of Nephi. So abridging, meaning taking just the most important parts of the history, the wars, the contentions, and then writing it on his own record. He then writes a history of the Nephite people in his own day. But while he is abridging these large plates, he gets a revelation or a prompting that he needs to include the small plates of Nephi with his records that he creates from the large plates. And he notices that on the small plates that there's a lot of Nephi's prophecies. There's a lot of other words that prove the prophecies and coming of Christ, both Christ coming to the Americas as well as his second coming. And because of the importance of those topics, he feels prompted to include the whole record. He doesn't abridge it. He includes the whole record with the large plates. Once he does this, he finishes his abridgment of the large plates. He takes that abridged record of the large plates. He takes the small plates, and he also takes the Jaredite records that he has, and he gives them to his son Moroni. And then Mormon buries the large plates and the other Nephite records that were used to compile these large plates. So once Moroni gets things, what happens? Well, he finishes Mormon's own personal record of what happens in his days, the end of the Nephite civilization. Then he abridges the Jaredite record. He writes a few of his own words, including some words that he has probably obtained from the three Nephite disciples about how the church was organized and how it worked after the time of Christ. And then he seals and he buries all the records in the earth, in the Hill Cumorah. So it's important to understand how these records would have been compiled by both Mormon and Moroni. First, you would have had an abridged portion of the large plates of Nephi from the time of Lehi to the time of King Benjamin. Then you would have had the small plates of Nephi and the Words of Mormon. The Words of Mormon is basically an insert that is put in between the large plates and the small plates. And these small plates, as we'll learn later on, actually do contain some of the things that are also on the large plates. Now, after this section, you're going to have the abridged portion of the large plates from King Benjamin's time to Mormon's time, which is roughly from Mosiah to about 4th Nephi. Then you're going to have Mormon's own personal history. You're going to have Moroni finishing Mormon's record with the destruction of the Nephite civilization. Then you're going to have Moroni's abridgment of the 24 Jaredite plates. And then Moroni's commentary on certain church practices and doctrines, which, as I mentioned, he probably learned these from the three Nephite disciples, because they deal with a lot of things that took place with Christ's visit to the Americas. And then there's some other certain letters between Mormon and Moroni that Moroni feels inspired to include. And finally, we have the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon, which is basically the brother of Jared's vision that he sees of pretty much everything from the beginning of creation to the end of the world. So now we've got an understanding of how the Book of Mormon was written and compiled. Now we've got to understand how Joseph Smith actually translated the plates. So we know that in September of 1827, Joseph actually obtains the plates from the angel Moroni. In the spring or roughly early summer of 1828, Joseph and Martin Harris began to translate the first portion of the plates, and they termed this first portion the Book of Lehi. So it would have included the things that Lehi wrote on the large plates, as well as a lot of the history, the wars, the contentions, the reign of the kings during Nephi's time. And we know that these span a period from roughly Lehi to King Benjamin. Now in the summer, and roughly around July 1828, we know about the story of the 116 manuscript pages that are lost. So Joseph receives a revelation in Doctrine and Covenants 3, where he's rebuked for allowing these records to be lost. And as a result of it, the angel Moroni takes back both the plates and the Urim and Thummim. After a period of repentance by Joseph in the fall of 1828, he is allowed to receive the plates and the interpreters, or the Urim and Thummim, back. And he's instructed to begin translating again from the reign of King Benjamin to the end. So the part about from on the large plates, King Benjamin's reign, all the way through. In the spring of 1829, roughly around April, Joseph and Oliver Cowdery inquire about what they should do about the portion that was lost in the 116 pages. Should they retranslate them? What should happen? As a result of that, they receive the revelation in Doctrine and Covenants 10, and Joseph is instructed to translate the small plates of Nephi. So he's to do the small plates of Nephi. He's not to go back and to translate the large plates from Lehi to King Benjamin. And then we know that sometime in May or June of 1829, they actually complete the translation of the Book of Mormon. So here's a timeline to help break this down about what portions of the Book of Mormon Joseph translated and when he translated them, or in what order. First, we know that he translated the abridged portion of the large plates from Lehi to King Benjamin. That was the 116 pages, which were lost. Then we know he translated the abridged portion of the large plates from King Benjamin's time to Mormon's time. And this is, of course, in the, later in 1828. He then translates Mormon's personal history. He finishes Moroni's Record of Mormon. He then translates Moroni's abridgment of the 24 Jaredite plates. Then Moroni's commentary on church practices and the letters from Mormon to Moroni. And then he translates the abridged portion of the small plates of Nephi and the words of Mormon. So, why is all of this chronology and history important? It's important because there are details and phrases which are found in the large plates of Nephi, which was translated first, that tie back to major narratives and prophecies found in the small plates of Nephi, which was translated last. Since Joseph Smith hadn't actually translated the small plates yet, how could he have referenced them in the translation of the large plates? There's no possible way he could have. Now, if he wrote the Book of Mormon, as some critics claim, basically the strategy he would have had to take was he would have had to reverse engineer the book. So first he would have had to scatter minor details throughout the translation of the large plates, and then he would have to go back and he would have to compose the complete narrative. And he had to do all this while still being consistent in both the tense of how he's writing as well as the content. And it had to make logical sense too. But wait, weren't there actually some details that overlapped between what was in the Book of Lehi and in the small plates of Nephi? Maybe that Joseph could have remembered. That's something definitely that critics would argue. And we actually know that this is true from Doctrine and Covenants 10. It says there, "And now verily I say unto you, that an account of those things that you have written, which are on the large plates of Nephi, which have gone out of your hands, is engraven upon the plates of Nephi. Yea, and you remember it was said in those writings, the large plates, that a more particular account was given of these things upon the plates of Nephi, or the small plates. And now, because the account which is engraven upon the plates of Nephi is more particular concerning the things which in my wisdom I would bring to the knowledge of the people in this account." So, Revelation to the prophet confirms that some of the content in the Book of Lehi compares and is similar to some of the content on the small plates of Nephi. But don't you think that maybe Joseph could have actually remembered the things that he'd previously translated from the Book of Lehi? So basically he could have just remembered these details and made them up. Well, let's consider some of the facts. We know that about a year's worth of time had actually lapsed between when Joseph translated the Book of Lehi to when he began the translation of the small plates of Nephi. We also know that Joseph didn't have any of the original manuscripts to look back on to ensure consistency. So while Joseph would have been translating a narrative that was similar in nature to what he had translated before, I would argue it's not probable that he remembered some of these details with such specificity almost a year later without the aid of any of his manuscripts. And it's important to remember that just because something is possible doesn't mean it is probable. A lot of people will say, oh, well, it's possible that this happened, but then you've got to actually take a look at the facts of the case or facts of what's going on and see, okay, well, how probable is that? A lot of people like to sensationalize things and make it out to seem like it's more probable than it actually is. And I think that the whole key in all of this is the prophet Mormon, because remember, he had access to both the large plates and the small plates. So he would have had first-hand knowledge of how these two sets of plates differed. He tells us in his own words that there were many prophecies and revelations of Nephi, as well as writings of Jacob, Enos, Jerem, etc., that were only on the small plates of Nephi. So this is important. There's certain things that were only on the small plates that Joseph wouldn't have translated on the large plates. So what were some of these details that were included in the small plates that weren't included in the Book of Lehi? Well, we know that there are certain prophecies of the coming of Christ to the Nephites, which are included there. We also know that certain prophecies of Nephi relating to the second coming of Christ are in there, especially in Nephi's own record of his interpretation of the Tree of Life dream. We know as well that the writings of Isaiah from the brass plates, which Nephi included on the small plates, were not on the large plates of Nephi. And we know that Zenos's allegory of the olive tree, which is in Jacob 5, was not in the large plates of Nephi. And that's just to name a few of them, but these are the major ones. So stay tuned for part 2. In part 2, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you scriptures that are on the large plates of Nephi, certain details that Joseph either didn't know from the large plates or the Book of Lehi, as well as some things from the small plates of Nephi that connect to what was translated on the large plates. So stay tuned. Hope you enjoy.